Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio.
And we're talking about something that kind of had already been hit on. So past hosts Kristen and Caroline did a great episode in 2009 on women in firefighting. But we thought we would take some time to talk about the women within the wildland firefighting community, a very specific group of people. It is a specific field that has become a huge need, unfortunately, especially as of late. Content warning, straight up. Obviously, we're going to talk about fires, land damage, all of that. There's mention of suicide, mention of mental health issues, as well as sexual harassment. So go ahead and have the thought. We're not getting too much into it. We're just getting into some statistics, as we always do. So there's a lot happening around the world. And unfortunately, some of these things are disasters that are destroying lands, property, and the environment overall. So, like I said, trigger warning about all these incidents. But we also mentioned fire and arson, death, and natural disasters. So with that, the wildland firefighting field has been around for quite some time now, like most of history around the world. Even with its existence, it took way, way longer for women to be even a part of this field at all. But before we get into all of that, we're going to look at statistics and facts around wildland fires in general. Again, it's a lot.
Yeah. So let's start with the definition. From ourworldandata.org, quote, a wildfire is an uncontrolled burn of vegetation, which includes the burning of forest, shrublands, and grasslands, savannas, and croplands. Wildfires can be caused by human activity such as arson, unattended fires, or the loss of control of planned burns, and natural causes such as lightning. The amount of wildfires in recent years has substantially increased. According to the 2023 World Resources Institute, quote, the latest data on forest fires confirms what we've long feared. Forest fires are becoming more widespread, burning nearly twice as much tree cover today as they did 20 years ago. Using data from a recent study by researchers at the University of Maryland, we calculated that forest fires now result in 3 million more hectares of tree cover loss per year compared to 2001, an area roughly the size of Belgium, and accounted for more than 1/4 of all tree cover loss over the past 20 years.
Right. And the article continues, 2021 was one of the worst years for forest fires since the turn of the century, causing an alarming 9.3 million hectares of tree cover loss globally, over 1/3 of all tree cover loss that occurred that year. Though down from the previous year, over 6.6 million hectares of tree cover was lost to forest fires in 2022, similar to other years over the past decades. And in 2023, the world has already seen heightened fire activity, including record-breaking burns across Canada and catastrophic fires in Hawaii, which we all remember. So in fact, in a recent article written by reporter Claire Moses for the New York Times, at least 4.5 million acres have been burned in North America this year already. Here's a quote from her article. So far this year, over 28,000 wildfires have burned more than 4.5 million acres in the United States, according to the National Interagency Fire Center. U.S. fire activity for 2024 is above the average for the last decade, agency data shows, and the resulting destruction has already mounted to more than that burned in all of 2023. And with the expected peak of this year's fire season still at least a month or more away, experts say that fires are burning with a level of intensity rarely seen at this point in the summer. And yeah, this article was written in August, y'all.
Typically, wildfire season begins in June or July and continues on into mid-fall, but some are saying that timeline will extend in part due to climate change. The article continues saying, quote, experts have grown concerned about the sheer number of fires burning in western states this early in the season. As of Saturday, there were 89 large active fires according to the NIFC, most of them in the Pacific Northwest and California.
The cause of wildfires vary greatly, but some of the causes are as follows, according to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, including lightning, burning off an outcrop or underground coal seam, campfire or bonfire, smoking like cigarettes and matches, fire use such as debris burning or burning of ditches and fields, arson or illegal burning, equipment such as vehicles and aircrafts, railroads, apparently part of that as well, kids or minors playing with fire or fireworks, and others are like, it can encompass so many, including birth announcements or gender reveals, as we remember.
Mm-hmm. Of course, as we said earlier, the current state of climate change has made the wildfire situation much more severe and concerning. Here's some information from the Environmental Defense Fund. Quote, climate change can make environments more susceptible to burning. Increasing severe heat and drought due to climate change can fuel wildfires. Hotter temperatures evaporate more moisture from soil and vegetation, drying out trees, shrubs, and grasses, and turning leaf litter and fallen branches into kindling. In times of drought, trees that are stressed by a lack of water may also become more vulnerable to insects and diseases that can weaken or kill them, creating more fuel for fires. And in the western U.S., snowpacks are shrinking and melting earlier in the year, which makes forests more flammable by reducing the water available for vegetation. Fire is a natural phenomenon that serves important ecological purposes, clearing dead and diseased plants from some forest, for example, and even helping some plants reproduce. But a rapidly warming planet, along with a history of short-sighted forest management practices and land use decisions that push development into the wilderness, is contributing to more destructive wildfires.
Right. And some more information from the World Resource Institute. Quote, climate change is one of the major drivers of increasing fire activities. Extreme heat waves are already 5 times more likely today than they were 150 years ago and are expected to become even more frequent as the planet continues to warm. Hotter temperatures dry out the landscape and help create the perfect environment for large, more frequent forest fires. This in turn leads to higher emissions from forest fires, further exacerbating climate change and contributing to more fires as part of a fire climate feedback loop. So in this, we were having this whole conversation about the fact that this is a whole cycle that's causing more and more chaos. We've talked about this before, about the cause and effects of some things, and forest fires is right in the middle of that. So there's different research and methods for trying to bring a solution to the problem of the increased wildfires, and much of that is being done through actual wildland firefighters.
Yes. For some context, here are some of the differences between wildland firefighters versus structural firefighters. From PalachiNews.com, the training and education of each are different. Quote, the first notable difference between structure and wildland firefighting is their disparate training and education methods. While both groups must receive extensive training, the biggest difference is in the techniques required to deal with hazardous fires, and their requirements are worlds apart. For example, a wildland firefighter must have a post-secondary education, pass various written and physical tests, have a red card certification that allows them to perform duties as a wildland firefighter, and have experience working in rough terrain. On the other hand, structural firefighters must go through various written and physical tests, pass several interviews, and have emergency medical technician EMT certification.
All right. So equipment and PPE are also different. For wildland firefighters, items like line gear, chainsaws, compass, and GPS are a must, while items like self-containing breathing apparatus, scuba, and axes are used for structural firefighters. So when we talk about structural firefighters, we're talking about, firefighters. That's what we regularly think. The ones on the calendar. Just kidding. It's also noted that being on duty for structural firefighters is all year long, while for most wildland firefighters, it is seasonal, as well as the fact that containing a wildfire versus a structural fire uses very different methods, such as wildland firefighters having to create, quote, fire lines by cutting down trees and digging up grass in the path of the fire to stop it from spreading. Stuff like that. And also, we're going to talk about some of the specialized units within wildland firefighters, which make them different as well. Ooh, okay, now we got that down. Let's talk about the history of wildland firefighters for just a minute. Bear with us. It was in 1885 that the Wildland Fire Control Program was initiated, and throughout history, there had been a long conversation of fire suppression versus fire control. When we mentioned earlier how that debate really may have cost how we handled and how the environment had made more problems because we didn't handle it so well. This is a part of this conversation, though, suppression versus control. So initially, it was thought that complete fire suppression was the answer. In fact, there was a debate, again, within the community about whether or not complete suppression was the only answer, and that controlled fire could be of benefit. But after the 1910 fire, which burned millions of acres and killed at least 90 people, with a majority of them being firefighters, many of them moved to complete suppression. It was in 1910 that they passed the largest budget to, quote, institutionalize and professionalize fire suppression. And this is according to the National Interagency Fire Center, or the NIFC. And it wouldn't be until the 70s they would change it from fire control suppression to fire management, due to allowing for more flexible process of, quote, appropriate suppression actions. Which could, quote, range from fully suppressing a fire to confining a fire within a certain area under predetermined conditions, as they figured out the complete exclusion could be hindering the ecosystem's natural process of regeneration. So it's got kind of that debate of like, it's not all bad, even though it seems very scary. Okay. Yes, we did it. Now, with all of that, let's talk about the women. When did the women start being a part of this conversation? Well, the first ever noted women to be part of the Wildland Fire crew were actually just known as Mrs. Durham and her friend Mrs. Kloppenberg. Right, so Mrs. Durham was the wife of one of the rangers of the California National Forest. And because of the war during that time, since there were not enough men in the fire crews and they had so many wildfires at the time, many of the crews enlisted and trained wives of Forest Service rangers to help. And yeah, we researched a bit more. I tried to get more information. I was like, oh, who is this person? What was she about? What was her first name? Couldn't find a damn thing. Like, there was nothing other than their married names and pretty much a salute. Thank you for helping out. Like, I think that was pretty much like the 1910s, like in war efforts when women were like, thanks for your help, go back home.
Right.
Essentially. But also want to note, because it was really interesting trying to get all this information about historical firsts. We've talked about this with Eves and so many other episodes. It wasn't all aligning. And some of the firsts were much later, and there probably were other women that we just don't know about or haven't been credited. I don't know. Because there was a first all-women crew that was noted to have started in the early 1940s. But that's it. Like, I couldn't find who they were, where they were who they were with. Maybe I looked at the wrong place. Maybe my search engine is really tired of me and like, I can't answer this question for you. Leave me alone. Because I got some like real like heavy blocks in trying to find some of those answers. But there was a mention of a crew, of an all-women's crew in the 1940s. But I don't think they were actually paid.
Well, as we continue to do more research, it was much later that any other women would be recognized as being part of the Wildland Firefighters and be integrated as paid staff. In 1971, we see one of the first women to be hired, Caroline Cara Peters, but she was quickly fired after that. That didn't stop her, though. Here's a quote about her history from BLM.gov, or Bureau of Land Management.gov. Quote, Cara first went to the press to make her case known to the public, then contacted a lawyer and finally made a direct appeal to the BLM. Because of growing fire pressures at the time, women had been filling positions such as working in dispatch and packing parachutes. However, Cara was told that she couldn't be a forest firefighter because it was not reasonable to expect the Bureau to provide separate sleeping accommodations and bathroom facilities for men and women on the fire lines. Eventually, however, Cara was told that if she could assemble 12 suitable candidates, half of a normal crew, they would begin a pilot program to test whether women had the necessary strength and endurance. She returned with 23 women.
Right. So when we say she was fired quickly, we mean 4 hours after she was hired. She was fired. Like, it was so quick. Like, they were like, oh, we made a mistake. You're gone. So she and the other ladies were not only able to train and pass without any trouble, but soon she and her team would go on to work alongside with other firefighters at the Wickersham Dome fire around Fairbanks, becoming one of the first to do so in BLM history. Again, I want to put this asterisk here. We're saying firsts very loosely because there could be others that we don't know about. Like I said, there's still a lot of information. I'm like, there's got to be more that we just don't know. So who knows? We might find more information later in time. So some of this might sound like, because we won't say the first, that's just the asterisk that we're always placing because we know history is ever growing and we're finding out new things. So, Just so we put that there. And just because, here's a quote from a 1971 article from the crew chief at the time. Quote, "The women competed successfully with the men and in fact were superior in many respects. As far as their physical capabilities, all were capable of handling the job and did." Like, he was thoroughly impressed, even though at first he was like, nah, thanks.
The ladies.
The ladies.
And soon after, we had other ladies taking a step further into the field by becoming some of the first women to be on hotshot crews. Hotshot crews are interagency hotshot crews are highly trained wildland fire crews that are specialized workers trained to lead and be on hand for all phases of a fire. Here's a specific description from the Forest Services site Interagency Hotshot Crews, HICs, commonly called hotshots or hotshot crews, are highly trained, specialized wildland fire hand crews that perform some of the most demanding and hazardous tasks in wildland firefighting. Their profession requires a high level of physical fitness and the ability to demonstrate A, extensive knowledge of fire behavior with the ability to develop and implement strategy and tactics on the most complex incidents under extreme conditions. B, a high aptitude for mitigating a risk using exemplary situational awareness and outstanding communication skills. And C, excellent leadership characteristics at all levels. Their primary mission is to provide a safe, professional, mobile, and highly skilled Type 1 hand crew status for all phases of fire management and incident operations.
So who are some of the first ladies to be a part of this elite crew? Thanks to Amanda Monte, I hope I had said your name right, a former fellow hotshot crew member from Oregon, and her article for OutsideOnline.com, we're able to talk about some of these women and their works and how they were able to break barriers. So thank you. And I think she is actually actively on a podcast too, or produces a podcast for women in wildland firefighters. But she did this article and these interviews after she discovered photos, all these old photos of hotshot members that were women. So she went on a search and found them and spoke to a few of them. So let's start with Dana Feldman. Feldman told Monte that she didn't know what she was getting into originally. Here's a bit from her interview. "To be honest, if someone told me what this whole fire thing would require, I would have said, oh, I can't do that," says Dana Feldman, who worked for Baker River Hotshots in the late 1970s and early 1980s. "I had no idea what I was getting into, and I wouldn't have done it if I had. But what fire taught me over and over and over again was how to throw myself into things and just start flapping my wings somewhere along the line." And though she may have gone in without really understanding it, she definitely excelled, even earning a performance award in her first season. And her work was so impressive. Her leaders even told her he would never have a fire crew without a woman in it. She even became the first woman hotshot squad boss at Baker Rivers. She eventually left the field to go on to become a psychotherapist, but she does talk about her experience.
Then we have Sue Husari, who worked with Lawson Hotshot Crew. She was the first woman for the crew and for the state. Here's a little bit from her interview. Quote, "Husari was hired to Lawson, a hotshot crew in Northern California, in 1976. She was the first woman on the crew and one of the first women on a hotshot crew in the state. I still don't know why they decided to hire a woman. It was very unusual," she says. Still, her experience on Lawson was overwhelmingly positive. Husari says she wasn't treated differently than her male colleagues, except that her coworkers often looked out for her, particularly because she was just 21 when she was hired. While she was new to the world of wildland fire, it didn't take long for Husari to realize that she was well suited for the rigors of hotshotting. My best attribute for firefighting was endurance, and I think that's common for most women who do this, she says, noting that she spent her youth and teenage years backpacking in the Sierra Nevada with her dad. I wasn't a natural athlete, but I could hike, I could carry heavy stuff, and I was familiar with the outdoors, so I was good at it.
Right. And then we have Kimberly Brandel, who was the first woman to be hired with the Zigzag Hotshot crew. And she was honest about some of the challenges she faced during her time on the crew. From her interview, quote, Brandel is refreshingly honest about her first year working as a hotshot in a world that was still a bit unsure about having women around. It was the attitude of a lot of men that I didn't belong there and that I was never going to be a part of the group because they didn't think I belonged there, she said. A gradual cultural shift in the Forest Service soon contributed to more women being being hired to the crew. Even still, it took years to change the perception that women on hotshot crews were tokens or only there to fill a quota. When I started in fire crews were like a pie cut into 20 pieces, and only one piece of that pie was allocated for women. The rest were allocated for men, Brindle says. But with her own hard work and abilities, she was able to become a part of the leadership and was able to help and bring in more women, providing more equal space in the field.
And we have Gina Popka, who became a hotshot in 1983, but would make history by becoming the first woman superintendent of a hotshot crew in 1991. From Monte, quote, after beginning her career with the Mount Hood National Forest-based Zigzag Hotshots in 1983, Popka went on to become the country's first permanent female hotshot superintendent, the highest position on a hotshot crew, in 1991. Only 11 women have since held that position, compared to more than 700 men since hotshot crews were first established in the 1940s, meaning just over 1% of superintendent positions on the country's 110 hotshot crews have been filled by a woman. And the article continues, Popka was known for being radically inclusive in her hiring. She made a concerted effort to continue Zigzag's long history of seeing the value in including women and other marginalized people on the crew. Long before such practices were being utilized on other crews around the country, Popka was regularly hiring 4 to 6 women to round out her 20-person crew, and up to 8 women when there was an influx of good applicants. Even today, it's rare to find hotshot crews with more than 2 or 3 women. Women sought me because I was the only female hotshot superintendent, and we were known to be a good crew, she says. For me, it was just giving them an opportunity to see what they could do with themselves. Women underestimate themselves, but I knew they'd do well.
I feel like that ties in with the Feldman when she was like, if I'd known, I wouldn't have done it.
Right. I wouldn't have thought I could. Yeah.
Exactly. So with those first, I wanted to add one more, and that's the first woman to become a smoke jumper. And here's an explanation of smoke jumpers from the NIFC. Smoke jumpers are unique because of the way they reach the fire line. They parachute from an airplane 3,000 feet above the ground. When wildfires ignite in remote and isolated locations, smoke jumpers are able to reach them fast because they can parachute to wildfires when there are no roads or trails nearby and get to work long before anyone could hike or drive to the fire. Smoke jumping is a physically and mentally demanding line of work that requires a broad knowledge of firefighting. Smoke jumpers are also heavily involved in prescribed fire management and hazardous fuels reduction efforts. Smoke jumpers are experienced wildland firefighters with expertise in initial attack firefighting and work with a variety of aircrafts. And who is this incredible woman who made history? We're talking about Deanne Schulman. Schulman not only had to work to meet the industry standard at the time, but had to push through the sexism within the industry. So here's a quote from the nationalforest.org. The first woman smoke jumper, Deanne Schulman, was hired in 1979, but despite meeting the established physical fitness standards, was washed from the program for being a few pounds under the required weight. This was despite it being known that there were several underweight men on other bases. After filing an Equal Employment Opportunity Commission complaint supported by one of those underweight men, Deanne was allowed to try again so long as she weighed at least 130 pounds on the first day of her appointment. This requirement has since been lowered to 120 pounds, but the physical fitness standards, including a 110-pound pack test, remain the same. In 1981, she completed rookie training and jumped at the McCall, Idaho smoke jumper base for 5 years. And here's a bit more of her story from an interview she did with Bakersfield, California. In 1981, she became a smoke jumper at McCall Smoke Jumper Base in Idaho. The process of proving herself began yet again, but her intelligence, courage, stamina, strength, and knowledge of firefighting won the day. By my 4th season, the McCall smoke jumpers were bragging that they had the first woman smoke jumper, Schulman remembered. Not only has she earned her place as a smoke jumper, she earned the respect of her fellow jumpers. So within the article, she spoke about the harassment she faced being one of 2 women that was a part of the hotshot crew, and even more so with her fighting to become a smoke jumper. But she also talked about how she was able to love the time she had as a smoke jumper.
Here's some more from her interview, quote, in spite of it all, the pornographic calendars, the juvenile pranks, and the institutional barriers to women, working as a smoke jumper for 5 seasons was an amazing experience, Schulman said. Underneath all this harassment, I knew they respected me because I could keep up, Schulman told her rapt audience. I also knew they loved me in a brotherly way. I felt that very deeply, otherwise I couldn't have been on that crew. It was kind of magical to be in such good physical shape and keeping up with them, she remembered. We got to travel all over to beautiful wilderness areas. The camaraderie of working 48 hours straight on a fire, Schulman said. You develop all that stuff that happens when groups of people work in adverse situations together.
So there's obviously other departments, I guess, or specialties within the wildland firefighters, including rappelling and then like field crew and all of that. And we didn't get into every single one of them. Apparently, it is known that the smoke jumpers get like the most romanticized because, you know, they're jumping out of an airplane. With water half the time, so they get some movies about them. I think there may be an actual movie about Schulman, or at least some references to her. I feel like, Anney, this would be something you would want to do. Once upon a time.
Yeah.
Something like you would have been like, yeah, I can do this. Let me try this. Of course, these are just a few of the amazing women who are breaking down the walls within the industry. But with that, where are we today? Though we do see more women in the field, it is still significantly low. So here's a quote from a 2020 National Geographic article titled, "The Women Battling Wildfires and Breaking Barriers in the American Wilderness." Quote, now more than 10,000 strong, they gather each summer, mostly in the western states, to defend national forests and public lands. In the past, women in this male-dominated field have faced implicit biases, sexism, and powerful gatekeepers who didn't make them welcome. Today, women still only make up 12% of wildland firefighters. So some more recent numbers, though, have shown that it has gone up to almost 13%. I think it kind of varies. I saw one that says that like 12.7%. So, but the atmosphere hasn't seemed to have been very welcoming even now, and many have faced some issues after starting in the field. Here's a quote from a recent Forest Services article. Quote, a 2019 survey by the Pacific Northwest Research Station found 75% of female wildland firefighters felt out of place due to their gender. The survey also revealed that 1/3 of the employees surveyed believed that personal characteristics such as race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, age, disability status, and family caregiver status had hindered their career advancement in wildland fire.
And with that, the field has also had to face their own Me Too movement. The issues plaguing the industry became known within the field in 2018 and were addressed by the vice president of the Association for Fire Ecology at the time. Here's a quote that you can find under Forest Services. Quote, the resignation of United States Forest Service Chief Tony Took in March 2018 under allegations of sexual misconduct have highlighted the need for our wildfire communities to build our collective capacity to confront and address these controversial topics. Sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, and gender discrimination is known to be widespread in many government agencies, including the U.S. Forest Service, National Park Service, and U.S. military. The United States is not alone in facing these issues. Canada and Australia report similar trends. And the report continues with some statistics. In 2015, an AFE survey with almost 350 respondents revealed that 32% reported observing incidents of sexual harassment in the workplace and 24% experienced it directly. 54% reported observing gender discrimination of others in the workplace and 44% reported experiencing it. 64% of respondents who experienced sexual harassment and 60% who experienced gender discrimination did not report it.
Right. And again, this is because a big scandal happened with the lead chief. So that's just a reminder. But in 2018, PBS did a report with women coming forward to about the level of harassment and assaults that they had experienced within the Forest Services. 3 of the women interviewed stated they had been raped by fellow employees as well. And of course, these allegations aren't new. In fact, in 2014, 7 women wildland firefighters filed a complaint against the Department of Agriculture, quote, alleging that they suffered job discrimination, harassment, and sexual abuse at the hands of male coworkers, and that top agency officials failed to stop it. And this was according to wildfiretoday.com. And yeah, in that same article, it says September 22nd, 2016, the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform heard testimony from 2 employees about harassment in the NPS and the USFS. Kelly Martin, fire management officer at Yosemite National Park, described, quote, a hostile work environment in Yosemite where dozens of individuals have come forward with personal statements of demoralizing behavior to include acts of bullying, gender biases, and favoritism. She also described sexual harassment in previous jobs where she worked for the USFS. But again, these aren't the only issues. What about the intersectional communities within this field? Here's some information from a research paper titled Gender, Sexual Orientation, and Ethnicity and Socioeconomic Factors Influence How Wildland Firefighters Communicate Their Work Experiences. Approximately 83.6% of wildland firefighters are white, 78.7% are male, and 93.5% identify as straight. The numbers alone are fairly discouraging, but within this research, they also found that the marginalized communities were at much greater risk mentally and physically. So here's some disturbing details within the research. Very limited research exists that contextualizes wildland firefighters, but work on female firefighters in Canada shows that othering through discrimination and hostility played a key role in women's experiences in the career. Likewise, few studies directly examine the ways in which these stressors may differentially impact minority and marginalized wildland firefighters. Those that do report trends in experiences rather than context, a quantitative survey of wildland firefighters' experiences observed significantly higher rates of reported injury in BIPOC wildland firefighters than white wildland firefighters. Similarly, they found occupational fatality for Black workers was 1.3 to 1.5 times higher than that of white workers. And they also found that Black women were more likely to be injured than white women while working in agricultural settings.
And of course, the mental health issues and crises that happen with this field are substantial. Unfortunately, the data seems to be lacking. As you can tell, some research is being conducted, but it does seem that a lot more needs to be done. Here's a bit from psychiatryonline.org about the whole thing. Quote, a national survey of all types of firefighters conducted several years back found that 55% of firefighters reported a history of suicidal behavior compared with 32% of non-wildland firefighters, according to a report by Ian H. Stanley and more in the August 2018 psychiatry research. One potential explanation was that wildland firefighters reported less sense of belongingness, such as having few friends and feeling disconnected from other people. However, out of more than 1,100 respondents, only 20 were wildland firefighters, the rest being structural firefighters.
Right, and they continue, recently dedicated researchers, many with ties to the wildland firefighter community, have begun to bring in more quantitative data on a variety of health and wellness topics. Patricia O'Brien, PhD, a prior wildland firefighter who went on to pursue a psychology degree, surveyed over 2,600 current, former, and retired wildland firefighters as part of her dissertation. Respondents filled out a variety of mental health screening measures and answered other questions about their experiences. She presented her findings in 2021 at the Wildfire 6th Annual Human Dimensions Conference, and they were alarming. 17% of wildland firefighters reported symptoms consistent with diagnosis of depression, and 13% reported symptoms consistent with generalized anxiety, and both about 2 to 3 times higher than the general populations. The prevalence of probable post-traumatic stress disorder was nearly 14%, which is 4 times the rate in the general population. Further, less than half of the respondents who had symptoms consistent with PTSD reported that they had been clinically diagnosed with the disorder, highlighting that this condition remains underdetected, unrecognized, and undertreated in a clearly at-risk group. More than half of the respondents reported binge drinking at least once in the past month, while 22% reported heavy drinking. And not surprisingly, cigarette use was rare in this group, but nearly 37% used smokeless tobacco products.
Unfortunately, with the relatively newer information, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of resources for wildland firefighters. The conversation of whether or not the government should be providing services along the lines of VA healthcare has been ongoing, but because of the structure of the field, it seems part of the confusion is who has authority over which unit.
Right. It kind of just spreads in different areas where who is under what governmental authority. So they are not unifying in how they should be treated or even recognizing the fact that they need to be treated. I think also part of the conversation, and I've seen this a lot when it comes to seasonal workers, even though it's seasonal because of the way this goes about, and not necessarily because it's like, it's a sale, it's a Christmas sale, you know, like, you know what I mean? That I think they really do see this as less hectic. But the amount of pressure I'm sure that they go through is intense, just in general, firefighters. But because the firefighters are ongoing and often see as emergency response continuously, I'm wondering if that's like they're seen as civil servants, even though I would assume the Forest Services are federal level, but yet they still haven't gotten to the point that like, oh yeah, maybe we should provide some services other than when they get hurt. So the question is, has the culture really changed? The numbers seem like they're kind of rising. Again, not significantly, 0.7% looked like. More attention has been brought about the need for diversity, but again, it doesn't seem to be fast in this progression. However, there have been several initiatives that have been implemented in order to bring some equal opportunities. One of the programs out there is including the California Conservation Corps, or the CCC. And here's some information from 19thnews.org. The California Conservation Corps, or CCC, a paid conservation work development program for the residents ages 18 to 25. Unlike the Civilian Conservation Corps, a program started under President Franklin D. Roosevelt aimed at putting men to work in the national parks and forests. The California version has been co-ed since its launch in 1976. However, women make up only 25% of the Corps members. Depending on which of the 24 centers they're located at, the work CCC members do range from apprenticeships in conservation, habit restoration and energy, to emergency management assistance in fires, floods, and mudslides. Part of the CCC's mandate is to recruit from low-income or otherwise marginalized population, providing a pathway into good jobs. The Corps requires that participants who don't have a high school diploma participate in the education program that allows members to take classes alongside their Corps' work to earn one. So even though this is not the greatest program, at least it is co-ed, and I did see other organizations do pull from that program to put into their own internship. So it could be a good opportunity. Oh, that could always be better, but at least they look at some of the marginalized communities.
Yes. There are also programs like Women in Wildland Fire, which even host events. Here's some information from their site. We are current and former wildland firefighters who have come together to share the experiences of women in fire. We aim to explore the challenges faced, highlight the progress made, and build a community to support and assist women and other underrepresented groups in this field.
Right. And not only do they put on interesting events. The one just happened in April, where they had different speakers come through. But they also have guides on how to apply for jobs and even give you a list of jobs that are opened, and help you with like employment guides. So that's good. And they have a great list of resources and organizations to look into for more help or information. So they've got some access. So they also have like some podcasts that they recommend about women in wildland firefighting. So a lot of information from them. And there's several more in different states have started doing different programs as well. Obviously, when we're talking about states, we're talking more about the Western area. I saw some for Colorado, obviously California and Washington, which is some of the big stuff that is happening because we are in the season, unfortunately. And as we read in that New York Times article, it has already begun. We know wildland fire has been raging due to a dude lighting his car on fire and just wanting to set something on fire. And this has been a conversation of a lot of concerns about, again, what is happening with the environment, what is the causes, how do we stop it, the suppression conversation, the control burning conversation. It's a lot, but it's good to know that there are some good people out there doing what they can, risking their lives for us. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. And listeners, if you have any experience with this, whether it's you or someone you know, if you have any resources, anything we should check out, please let us know. You can email us at stuffmediamomstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter at MomStuffPodcast, or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff I Never Told You. We're on YouTube. We have a TeePublic store, and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks as always to our super producer Christina, our executive producer Maya, and our contributor Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your favorite shows.